Good morning, everybody. It's Sunday morning, and you may notice that we strategically scheduled this meeting or this webinar actually to occur before the NFL playoffs begin at 12:05 p.m. Pacific time, and we'll be done well before then. So any of you who are waiting around to watch the first game, which I think was the Jaguars and the Patriots, you'll be able to get to that. Anyways, so we have a special guest with us today, and I thought I'd let him introduce himself. Who decided to show up today for the webinar? So there he is.
Good day, good evening, wherever you are in the world. It's very nice to be back in the cockpit here, and of course the markets have continued ever on higher over my very mini sabbatical, and that's not too surprising. Right now they're a bit more extended above their 10-day moving averages, as we've talked about in our pre-market pulse reports. So again, with the government shutdown that occurred on Saturday, it would be completely reasonable to expect some sort of knee-jerk pullback when the markets open again on Monday. And historically speaking, I sent that chart out about all the was rather a table about all the U.S. government shutdowns that haven't always been bad for equities. I pointed out that even half of the instances are green. In other words, the S&P returned positive over the period of the shutdown. However, it's not surprising that the market had a knee-jerk reaction to the downside when the government was shut down. We all know that when even the very whiff of news of the government shutting down causes the major averages to sell off, usually not so much, maybe 0.5%, maybe 1%. And I used the most recent example of September 30th, 2013, that shows 3.1% in green, but the reality is that the major averages actually pulled down a few percent, 3 to 4%, starting on the first day, and leading up to a few days into the shutdown. And then it was only later on during the duration of the shutdown that markets then found their lows and rallied. So as we know, in this kind of market where a 3 or 4% correction is quite an order of magnitude away from the norm in this QE environment, it's always mindful to be watching your stocks, having your stops in place no matter what. And especially now with the major averages being quite extended, I think it's a great excuse for a pullback to their respective 10 and 20-day moving averages, which is a bit of a distance from where they're at right now. I mentioned in also one of the MLRs that we've got the 10-year against the 2-year treasuries, where the yields are starting to narrow. And basically, when you get a narrowing yield spread, you get eventually, if they cross, you get a yield curve inversion, and that inversion will typically precede recession by as much as two years. So it's not a great timing mechanism, but it is an omen of sorts. And certainly with this bull market that really began in 2009 with the advent of QE, the recession this time may come much sooner, especially if that QE bubble begins to burst. And that, I think, will be predicated on whether central banks shrink their balance sheets too aggressively. I think they're very well aware about that issue. So my guess, if I had to hazard one here, is that the recession may actually be delayed another few years. This bull market can keep going while central banks play this juggling act, kicking the can down the road as far as it'll go. I mean, this road seems endless, actually, but they know that this bubble upon them is it's very substantial. So they need to be very careful. And I think that right now QE is still flowing into the system in an appreciable way. And you got Bank of England, Bank of Japan, European Central Bank, and so on, that they're starting to shrink, but not really by meaningful amounts. And that I think is going to be the issue. I think that Germany said recently that there's going to be 1 trillion that initially that need to be unwound, and that's going to be the bull market's great crash test. My feeling is it's not going to pass it because we are due for some serious bear market. And that's not just coming from me, but from observations likes of Jimmy Rogers, Bill Gross, a number of these stock market luminaries, call them what you will. So again, it comes back to never get complacent just because this market seems to go up and up and up. This is the time to be very mindful of your positions and keep your stops within reason so that you can always redeploy your capital. Let's see, what else did I want to talk about? We've got, well, I guess price of oil and commodities seems to be trying to create a new uptrend. But if you look at the monthly of indexes like the CRB index, you tend to get kind of a question mark in terms of whether commodities are really turning the corner. Yeah, there's the monthly on the invalid symbol.
What's the symbol on that?
Actually, I'm not sure. I always use the one from the other system. Are you on
e-signal? Isn't it?
Well, you can use USO is the price of oil, and that's not the basket, but still it's
yeah.
It's
I mean, yeah, people make a big deal out of the price of oil rallying, but when you look at it on a monthly basis, it's still trapped in a low base range, and I guess you could say it's got a lot further to go if it's going higher, but people are making a big deal out of oil rallying, but when you look at it within this context, there really isn't a heck of a lot going on outside of the, what do you got, like a 30% rally, I guess, over the last 4 weeks or so.
Right.
But
and the CRB is a kind of mirrors this pattern. The CRB together with oil have been
isn't
highly
there
correlated.
an ETF for the CRB? I'm trying to remember what that one is. Anybody out there know? Are you guys awake? I noticed there's no questions. Nobody even welcomed Dr. K back to the webinars.
Do they remember me? Here, the e-signal, commodity research.
You can hear us fine, I'm sure. Welcome back on.
Or do we have a whole
finally?
Do we have a whole new group of people?
Pardon me? Go ahead, Dr. K. What did you say?
Or do we have a whole new group of people? I know that
they're having a few more new faces showing up more recently. So
yeah. No, I got a lot of
great to hear you. Sorry, it's good to have you back. Okay, there we go. There's like, oh, look at that, like 300 people just said you're awesome, Dr. K.
Yeah, no, I got a lot of love.
We miss you.
I got a lot of love from that the crypto corner piece that I sent out, that second one. That was nice. It couldn't respond to everyone, but it was nice to hear the support.
You were definitely.
I thought I'd get some confrontation because I thought I was saying some controversial things, but it shows you that we have a really good group that seems to be very switched on and awake to what's going on in the world. Anyway, I was looking for the CRB signal. I'm not finding it. I don't think I've ever used it on
the CRB index. I used to know what this was. I thought it was CRB or something like that.
Let's see.
Everybody's asking about blockchain now. Somebody says more crypto, Dr. K, more.
Yeah, that seems to be in good demand.
GBTC. Here we go. Here's some crypto for you. There's a nice monthly chart for you if you like. And really, if you look at this within the context of their overall move on a monthly chart, it hasn't really given up much of its gains, at least on this, even though Bitcoin itself has plummeted in half, not really giving it up here. So,
well, what's interesting is Bitcoin had a big bubble that burst in late 2013. And then from basically the beginning of 2014 all the way to the middle of 2015, it formed a low, or rather it formed the left-hand side of the cup, which represented, I think, about an 89% correction peak to trough. It went up to about 1150 and then went all the way back to about 40 over that year and a half. And then what we're seeing here is GBTC was created right about mid 2015. So you can see that, yeah, starting in July, basically, it just has had this right-hand side of the cup formation. It completed that right-hand side in January of 2017. And then from there, it re-accelerated its ascent, which is why you get this really nice move there. And Bitcoin went from its old price high of about 1,100 to close to 20,000 by December. So what's interesting about GBTC, actually, if you could pull up the daily on it, what I love about GBTC over actually trading Bitcoin on an exchange is that there's serious inefficiencies in GBTC. So if you look at the daily on this one, you'll see that at the end, rather in mid-December, Bitcoin went on a, well, this GBTC went on a huge price run, well ahead of the price of Bitcoin. So basically what you do
right here, right? With the pocket pivot, we got the pocket pivot right here, and boom, we caught it perfectly.
Yeah, and it was a beautiful move, but here's the thing. When you have such an excessive move that outruns the price of Bitcoin by, I think it was something, it was like 30 or 40% ahead of the price of Bitcoin or
Right.
more. I mean, it was appreciable. Basically, on the next day, you want to get out of this position when it breaks the closing price of the prior day. So basically, you know, you're looking at, hold on a second here.
Right here, where I'm showing it right here. So right just above, what was the low here? The low here was 2860. So right here.
Basically, yeah, actually, so it closed around 3470, 3480.
Yeah.
So I would keep I mean, this is such a gimme trade. You sell it maybe when it breaks 3400. You're selling it very close to, well, it opened at 32 and change, maybe 3220. Right. So you could either sell it right at the open, which is probably what I would advise generally, because you've had such a huge move.
Right at the peak, I thought there was also a lot of anecdotal evidence of a top, and mainly people like Stuart Varney on Fox Business had suddenly become a believer in Bitcoin and blockchain, and this is all real. I mean, he was a skeptic the whole way up, and then finally, right at the top, he's suddenly a big believer. Sort of reminds me of the dot-coms in March of 2000. And then they interviewed a high schooler who had bought some Bitcoin at $400, and he was a newly minted millionaire. He's now about half that, I guess. And they're talking to him as if he's an expert. And he said, never sell Bitcoin, which, I think you trade it personally. And so there's a lot of anecdotal evidence of a top, too, coinciding with that move, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, you get a lot of froth. Same thing has happened a number of times before. I mean, it happened in December of 2013. Right. You had a lot of excess going on. And also Bitcoin just went up about 1,100% in about 6 or 7 weeks. So based on the context of its historical move that I could trace back to 2010, it was so far outside its price zone. I mean, you had to sell it. When it got up beyond 1,000, you got to have your radar on to get rid of it and take your profits. Yeah. The thing is, you don't know if it's going to go to 2,000.
If you go back and look at a daily chart, you can see the moves will usually be 8 to 10 days straight up, pretty much, and then it rolls over here. Here you get a couple of selling days in here before it goes higher, and then over here you're running up. You run up several days in a row. So you think they didn't kill it here? It consolidated and took off, and you run up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 days, and then you sort of top out here, another retest. And then again, you get a similar type of move here where it runs up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 days and then tops out. And then more recently, what did we have? 6 days, 7, 8, and 8 out of 9 days it was up. And then you had the biggest point move. That was almost a classic climax top. So,
yeah, it was. To me, it was very. Some of the others may not be so obvious, but this one is very obvious. And I mean, frankly, you just sell it the next day when it gaps lower like that. You don't try to get greedy and think it's going to keep going, because you've had a huge move. But here's the beauty of it. What I like about GBTC is that, so you're out, let's say you sold it at 3,200. So then it collapses well beyond the excess of Bitcoin itself. I mean, Bitcoin, I think, was off maybe 33%. But instead, this collapses something like 70%.
Right. So basically, the premium first works for you, then it works against you.
Exactly. So basically, on the day, it gaps lower to about what, 1350.
Down here.
Yeah, you could start nibbling on it. You don't know how much lower it's going to go, but I would take, you got a lot of winnings from the run, so I would be putting, maybe whatever. Let's take 100% as your final position. I would put maybe a quarter in at the gap lower, so that's 1350, and then as it goes lower, it goes all the way down to what, 11 something. So you could nibble on it a few, a little bit more there, and then as it crosses back up above 1350, then you can finish rounding out your position, and then look what it does. I mean, if your average cost was say, well, let's say 1350, it might actually be lower, but if your average cost was 1350 or 1400, then the next day you're basically sitting on, a 75% gain overnight.
Wow, it's a double.
And then you want to sell. You want to sell it when it just shoots up like that, or at the very latest, sell it the next day when it breaks below the low of that gap update.
Now, here's a quiz question for everybody. On this day here, which is what we're talking about, do you see the long setup on this day that occurs? Anybody? Look carefully. What do you see? Someone's got to know the answer to this. Well, I guess we won't be sending out any free t-shirts today. I told you, Dr. K, I actually found a stash of like 10 t-shirts. UNR, there we go. All right. All you have to do is come to LA and pick up your t-shirt.
I thought there'd be loads of people saying UNR though, because it's such a UNR pattern. It's perfect.
Yeah, and it actually will work. There's another UNR in this earlier that people picked up on back. Where was this? Let's see. Well, there's a couple in here, but that was really the thruster right here. You got a nice jack to the upside. Now you're pulling to the 50-day line. Volume is drying up. It may be settling down. I noticed that this Riot blockchain, which we put this on as a viable gap up on this day, and right when it was at 19, figured that's your spot to jump in. You doubled over the next few days. But notice how now you're sitting tight at the 50-day moving average with volume drying up. And I'm wondering if this is something to look at. Do you think these companies are valid, Dr. K, or do you think they're BS?
The ones that are valid are the ones that are actually investing in the cryptocurrencies themselves, because
which ones
their value will be predicated on the value of the crypto space. And I do believe that the crypto space is far from over in terms of the move. I mean, we will have more bubbles that will burst. That's just the way of it. But I think the current bubble is not yet over, and you can see that Ethereum and Bitcoin seem to be they're trying to trace out a base right now, and that will, of course, if you have more and more countries starting to get in the way of Bitcoin and the technology itself, that will put further headwind on the price. But I mean, we've seen countries like China and Russia have, try to have an impact on the technology by blocking it, banning it, and whatnot. And that what ends up happening is flood of investors come in and support the price. And also more and more of these substantial wealth funds, sovereign funds. We have, of course, the ICE network and commodity, these various formidable groups that have a lot of capital at hand. They're coming into the space. So I think that's going to also further inflate the current run. Therefore, the price of Bitcoin, for instance, right now is around 13,000, 12,000, and it topped out around 19,000. I think once it's done finishing this basing process, and I mean, this basing process could go all the way down to 6,000 or whatever. Wouldn't be surprising. But once that's complete, then we're going to get another big run like we've seen in the past. And of course, Ethereum seems to be more resilient because it has all these blockchain technologies on its network. So where the price of Ethereum goes, there's a nice correlation between between that and a lot of the cryptocurrencies out there. And like I said, Ethereum seems to be more resistant right now to pullbacks relative to Bitcoin. But the whole space right now, I think it's valued at about 550 billion, and it topped out around 800 some billion.
You know what the symbol is for Ethereum?
ETH.
ETH?
Yeah.
Let's see. Give me a sec here.
So if you go up there, just type ETH into the window.
Right here.
And then pull down like an ETH US dollar or whatever.
That's Ethan.
Yeah, that'll do it.
How about it's probably ETH.
If you type it into the window, it should give you a pull down menu.
So let's see.
And you'll be able to find the Ethereum in the pull down menu. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah. So it's hanging in a little bit better. Someone is asking about what is your take on the BLOK ETF? Holy cow! Look at that. Just came out, I guess.
Yeah. This is the. Hold on a second here. God, there's so many. The space is so crowded. I spend a lot of my days just reading through all the different ICOs and also the changes going on, and it's quite overwhelming. There's never enough time in the day to finish out. Let's see. BLOK is the that is the Amplify Transformational. I'm just trying to. This is it. What I'm trying to find is, does anyone know if they have holdings in various crypto technologies and where to find that? Because that's the first thing I try to find. You know, for these types of ETFs, you want to see what they're doing, and if it's doing something like that, then it could based on it. Actually, it's not very volatile, so it must not be doing that. It must be doing something else. Because a lot of these companies that just go on switch on the blockchain technology, unless it's something that is really valid to what their business is, a lot of these are going to be one-hit wonders, just like with the .com boom.
I was
Here, the new blockchain ETF is diversified. It says. Okay, so it provides exposure to blockchain companies. Let me. Yeah, Riot Blockchain is interesting because it supposedly has good investments in the space.
Right, investing in companies that develop blockchain technology. So.
Right, and I read a little bit on the company.
I mean, I wrote that I thought blockchain would be a theme to watch out for in 2018 and probably going forward as well. But you're going to see new opportunities popping up. And I think that's where the big money will be made at some point during the year again. So
yeah, well, blockchain's here to stay. I mean, it's going to be, you know, there's going to be so many companies that are going to be new. Well, look at all the, you have all these ICOs. I think we're over 1,000 ICOs now. 2017 was the year of the ICO, but I see that trend accelerating. But you'll also have other blockchain-based businesses, and you'll also have non-blockchain companies starting to realize the huge efficiencies gained by blockchain, so they'll start migrating over as well. So I think we're going to see a flood of capital come into the blockchain space, and that's another reason why I don't think the bubble. When I say bubble, I mean like bubbles we've had, where you get a massive acceleration in price across the board, like we did in June of last year. That was a huge bubble because you had all these ICO companies that went up anywhere between 15 to 100-fold in the first 6 months of last year. And that was a very telltale sign of a bubble that had to burst, and it did in some spectacular fashion in June. And then the trick was finding the companies that would buck the trend, like Neo, for instance, was one of them. Walton was another. And then, you know, in other words, it's kind of like in the .com days. You want to find the companies that are least resistant to falling when the rest of the market heads south. That's why in October of 1998, when the Nasdaq had corrected some 35%, you look for the companies that withstood that correction the best, and those were companies like Yahoo and I think VeriSign and Network Solutions, a number of these other companies that resisted that downtrend. And those were often the first to hit new highs. And in the current ICO space, that kind of method, it's always worked. You can go back to the 1920s, you find similar action. So it's market psychology at its best. And of course, you can use relative strength as your main guide, but I would also, because I'm a fundamentalist by nature, I always like to see the management, the vision, the ability, the track record of each team member, and what potential market they can disrupt. Because in the blockchain space, it's all about disruption. And certain companies, certainly like Walton, which decentralize the entire radio frequency ID tags on every device. I mean, that's a mega disruption to that business, and that explains why Walton tends to want to go higher, even when we've had the current correction at hand. Same with Neo. Neo has resisted the downtrend that started in Bitcoin. What was it, a few weeks ago? So those are all good signs that you're in the right space. But I encourage you, if anyone's investing in these things, you got to really know the business. You got to understand the people involved. You got to do your homework. There's no substitutes for get rich quick, because companies can also turn on a dime. They can turn on you on a dime. And it's not uncommon for a company that, these things will go up tenfold, and it's not uncommon for them to lose 90% of their value and reverse all their gains. So you don't want to get caught on the wrong side.
Okay, so should we start looking at some stocks, or is everybody wanting to talk about blockchain for the entire webinar?
We could do a blockchain webinar at some point, I think, but
yeah, we could.
Might as well mix it up with stocks as well, because the market keeps heading higher, and there's some good ones out there that have been profitable.
Yeah.
I'm still looking at this block because there's a couple good write-ups on it.
Maybe you could write something on it. I don't know, as an MLR possibly.
Yeah, that and Riot maybe something in the future.
Yeah,
I've thrown some stuff out on GBTC, and that of course still remains viable, just because its excessive nature. Although it's not as liquid as actual Bitcoin. I mean, if you're trying to buy, even $100,000 of GBTC can move the price a few percent if you're caught on the wrong, on the wrong side. So, but if you're trading, 50,000 or less, then I think it's pretty quick to buy positions without moving the price.
We're kind of getting more people want to talk about stocks now, although I think everybody did appreciate the discussion on blockchain, which I think is helpful. Give you some ideas to where things stand. I don't think that, I think that we topped out up there around 20,000 in the short term. I think you're now going to see a long basing period as things get worked out. So, but anyways, we can look at stocks now, and basically what I wanted to do was go through my buy watch list, and we throw up a weekly chart and we throw up a daily chart. Let's see here. And we can run through these and get a sense of where everything is at. So this is one of the things I like to do, is run a daily and a weekly and scroll through. So, and we've talked about several of these names in the past couple of weeks during the webinars. So we'll start out with A is for Altaba, not Apple. And this is actually the old name for Yahoo and its stake in, or Alibaba's stake in Yahoo, which looks similar to Baba. The only difference here is that if you look at this, you're sitting on top of a base and you've come right down on top of it. And so it looks to me like this would be a spot to be buying this one right here at the 20-day line. Now, this will correlate to some extent to Alibaba, which is, we're going to pull that up here. Feel free to chime in at any point. If I get to this real quick, we can go back to blockchain. But here you can see Alibaba's doing the same thing, which makes me think, okay, if this is correlating to Alibaba being, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, being at the top of its prior base, and this may make Alibaba viable here. They came out with earnings on February 2nd, so we'll see what happens. But this one, Alibaba is on my list as a buy right now because it's at the top of the base at the 20-day line. I think that keeps risk to a minimum. So Apple is sitting over here, and it is on. And basically, what I want to do is go through these names and set up a plan of action for the coming week, depending on what happens. So Apple's broken out. You can see it broke out 3 days ago when they announced that they're going to be expanding operations, pulling in slightly. Volume was a little heavy on Friday, but that's probably options expiration there. It's within viable range, but if it pulled down to the 10-day on a market pullback, that would probably be a better lower risk entry point. AbbVie I talked about as being viable along here about a week or so ago, and it's gone higher, so that's kind of out of there. Adobe Systems is another one, and it's going tight sideways after breaking out. It looks a little extended to me, so I'm not really a buyer. Analog Devices broke out, went straight up, and now it's pulling back, so that's extended. But you got to watch all of these because they come into the 10-day line. They're probably going to be viable. Align Technology, here's another one breaking out. It actually had a pocket pivot here, and then it pulled back in here, and volume dried up, and then it turned and went higher. So that was a possibility. Why don't we put an alert out on that one? Here's AMAT. I think AMAT looks okay here. I think you have a trend line breakout, and so it's pulls in. It may noodle around. I know that we have KLAC is coming out with earnings, I think, next week. So there may be some movement in these semiconductor equipment makers as a result of any of these reporting. I know that Ichor is what triggered the move in a lot of these on Wednesday when it reported revenues were going to be. You know what these are? This is a monthly chart here. Okay. You can see this is a very strong move, but it's coming straight off the bottom of the pattern. So I just kind of watch and see how it sets up. Maybe the 10-day line catches up to it, and then that is in a better position. So ANET, this is Arista. This is making new highs after a breakout. Aptio, I was saying this is viable along the 20-day line, and it's posted a pocket pivot on Friday. Activision is a breakout, and it's a little bit extended, so I don't see it as viable, but the 10-day line would be a viable spot. Now, you got to keep in mind that Electronic Arts, EA, which is on the focus list, reports earnings on January 30th, so there could be some action as a result of their report that affects both ATVI and Take-Two. So keep an eye on that. Avago is just kind of hanging out in the base, so I don't really see anything all that terribly actionable here. There was a pocket pivot right here, just above the 20-day line, and then you pushed above the 10-day line, but you're just kind of fluttering about, so there's nothing really definitive here as far as I can tell. I also think they're going to announce earnings pretty soon. Alteryx, you guys remember this one? We had it on previously, and it had a nice move. You have a pocket pivot right here, and it's hanging tight, so that looks decent, but it's a very thin name. Trades 686,000 shares a day, but it's acting okay. And I noticed that we're seeing some movement into small cap names. BABA, I already talked about that. Bank of America is edging higher. Financials are moving higher. They don't really thrill me though, so I don't know. We'll see what happens. But I think probably the brokers look at IBKR. Which is Interactive Brokers. I know Ameritrade and Schwab have both had decent moves. Here you have BlackBerry, though, undercut and rally, trying to set up here. It may be a little early, but it looks like it's trying to set up in here. Excuse me. Builders First Source, nothing going on there. Citigroup, here's another. You could consider this a breakout and being within range of the breakout on Citigroup, so another financial. But you'll notice that they tend to be slow boats to China. They just kind of edge higher, break out and go sideways, break out again, go sideways. Not huge movement, but it's slow and relatively steady. So car gurus. I think we've looked at this in the other webinars. This was tied along the 50-day moving average, and you probably had voodoo volume right there, and it popped out of there. So that thing's extended now. Cat is holding tight sideways. They have earnings to report on Thursday morning. Cloudera, we've talked about this before, and I think I talked about it in the last webinar as something you had to buy on the pullback, and you got to buy this one on weakness. I think we talked about how the character of the stock is such that that's really the only way to buy it. Coherent, it broke out and now it's pulling in slightly. Are these guys, what are these guys big in, Dr. K? Is it 3D sensing as well?
Let me check real fast. I believe that's right.
I also think Qualcomm, which is another name to be looking at, is they come out with earnings, I think, in a week or so. And somebody's who's trying to buy them. Is it is Broadcom or Vago? What do they call themselves? I think Broadcom's trying to buy them now. But notice how it's real tight, and that looks like it's almost buyable. If you had a quick wig out to the 10-day line, that would be nice to see. But the one thing about Qualcomm is I think they are moving into 3D sensing as well, because I noticed this one that I liked, Light, it's just breaking down, and they may not have such a dominant position for very long. Maybe others are moving in there. You see Salesforce trying to break out. It's wedging to new highs, so I'm looking for a pullback there. Here's an interesting one. You had a pocket pivot, and nice pocket pivot, and then you pull into the 50-day line. So this one looks viable on the pullback to the 50-day line, control 4. Citrix is moving higher. That's extended. Deere is extended. ePay, it's kind of blah. Extreme Networks, building a base. Maybe it's trying to break out. I don't see any real major buy points in there. FANG, the oil stocks have been doing well. FANG pulling into the 20-day line. That's probably a secondary entry if you like oils, and that's my favorite oil, and not just because it has a very cool symbol. Facebook, you can see, is stalling out at the 20-day line, so it looks like a short to me. Interestingly, though, if you look at the weekly chart, you actually see a supporting week at the 50-day line. So part of that is the heavy volume here, and then last week, I think this is last week, you had that one spike in volume there on the downside when they reported that news about the news feed. So I'm thinking this one may be a short here, but I'm also looking, it would have to break the 50-day line to confirm that. If it's able to settle down along the 50-day line, it might be viable. Then you got earnings on February 1st. So somebody's saying QCOM could be alternative flawed Intel server chips. Okay. Somebody says we talked about the UNR and the line right before the move up, so that was really good. That's right, we did. So FireEye, I'm watching this one. It looks like a head and shoulders on the weekly chart. Can you guys see that here? So that's not looking so hot. Floor and Decor Holdings is extended. Frac, this one was looking okay. Keen Group, the old Keen Group, and I don't know, that's not really doing anything. I think with the price of oil going up, that's going to be the primary driver of oil stocks, and I think pretty much any oil stock will do it, and the ones that are probably the best leverage to the price of oil, which I think something like FANG is, probably are better plays, and I don't think it matters whether they're fracking or not fracking. Fortinet, we had talked about this one as being viable along the 20-day, I think a week or so ago, in a couple of webinars ago. GBT is extended, Global Blood Therapeutics. We already talked about Bitcoin, GoDaddy hanging out in a base here, tight along the 10-day line. GDI, we actually put this one on as a pocket pivot on this day, if you guys recall, and it's had a nice, slow, and steady trend. I mean, not going to thrill you to death, but it's slow and steady. And these industrials, we have that. We have CAT that we put on the focus list because I think that's just the most powerful one. And, why try to kiss all the babies when you can just have the most powerful one on? Somebody was bugging us because they thought we should have a lot more names on the focus list. And my observation is that sometimes there are just too many. And if the purpose of a focus list is to give people a finite list to deal with in terms of where the leadership is in the market or the potential leadership, then why do you call it a focus list to begin with? If it's going to be a out of focus list, you got like 25, 30 names on it, and I don't know if that's necessarily a focus list. So there might be a couple of names we could have put on, I suppose, in hindsight, but I think that we've got some good ones. Netflix has had a great run. It's probably the best performing, along with Nvidia, the best performing big stock Nasdaq tech name out there over the last couple 3 weeks. Google keeps moving higher, slow and steady. Canada Goose, remember this one? We've had this one on. We put this one on as a Bible gap up here. It had a little bit of a pullback and then has just continued to truck higher. So Grow, I have this one on my list. This is another Bitcoin blockchain thing. Grub, notice Grub pulling into the 50-day line where it got some support. This may be setting up again because notice on the weekly chart over here, you're coming up off the tail of the low here, and the volume's picking up slightly. What happened to this thing? Come on. Volume picking up slightly here on support at the 50-day line. So it's building another base is what it looks like to me. I don't know if it's really breaking down. I mean, it's had a good move, so some selling is probably warranted, but this may be one to keep an eye on. Icar I already talked about, looking for a pullback there. Here's 2.6. They had a pocket pivot, a little bit of a stalling pocket pivot here. And they announced earnings, I think, this week, so not really much to do here. I will be watching the earnings report when that comes out. JP Morgan, another financial kind of just edging higher. Again, they tend to jack, on a breakout, and then that's it. And then they just go sideways for a long period of time. Here's KLX. This was a Bible gap up here, but notice you had another pocket pivot on Friday, which looks Bible to me. I check when the earnings are. KLXI is a symbol. I got to tell you, it was 44 degrees overnight here in Playa del Rey in California, and it was butt cold, and our heater was on all night, and we never have our heater on all night. It might come on for a little while and kind of break any chill that comes into the house, and then it stops, but the heater was on all night, and it just kind of rasped out my whole throat and nose, so I don't know what's up with that. Oh, Kennametal, we put this one on as a Bible gap up, and then I talked about how, is that right? No, we put it on as a pocket pivot here, and it's slowly moved higher. Nothing to blow you away or anything. The problem with some of these, and we've seen this a number of times in this market, is that you'll have these slow, steady rallies, and they trend higher, and all of a sudden in 2 days, boom, they lose all their profits. That's what's always making you look over your shoulder. Kansas City Southern, the rails have acted well, but they seem to be basing. KSU is one of them. It looks like it got support at the 59, so that's not a pocket pivot, but it looks interesting. Here's Light. This is a piece of garbage. Triple L, that's extended. Live Person, I'm trying to figure out what this one's doing. It looked like it was going to get going in here. And then I think you had like a pocket pivot here, which would have been right here. It stalled a little bit, then cleared the 50-day line. You get whacked with some volume. So I don't know. Here's Lam Research. They're going to be reporting earnings, I think. No. I think they are this week. I got to check that. So if you can check that, Dr. K, I'd appreciate that. But you had a pocket pivot coming up through the 50-day line. I'd watch to see if you get any kind of pullback close to the 200 level. That might make it viable. If we had a nice yank to the downside after this government shutdown, I think you'd have to be looking at some of these names pulling into deeper support. Okay, and that's one thing I would be keeping an eye out for. Las Vegas Sands.
Lam Research, I think. What do you want to know? The
earnings report date?
Yeah, it's January 24th.
Yeah, so that's this coming week. That's on Wednesday.
And it's going to be after the close.
LVS had a Bible gap up, I guess, and that's hanging in there all right. It's tends to run up and then come back in. But I would say with all of these, you can make this your buy list as well. This is my watch list, except for the junky stocks that are still in there. MDXG, that's a nice little pullback right into the 10-day line. I think that's buyable. Again, check earnings. In my view, if the earnings are 2 to 3 weeks or more away, then you have a shot. Like with Netflix, you could have bought that at the end of December, and in a couple of weeks you had a nice big move, so you have cushion ahead of the earnings report. Here's Melco. I've been talking about this one for a long time. I think when it was down in here, and it just wasn't going anywhere. Finally, you gap out, but the gap goes a little further, and then you come back into the 50-day line. So the place to buy was on the pullback to the 50-day line. I think it's extended now. Marvell is trying to buy Cavium, and it's just hanging tight. Looks okay. I mean, possibly buyable here using the 10-day line. But again, see if we get a pullback on any of these. Netflix is doing well. We'll see what happens after earnings on Monday. ServiceNow has been a very slow and steady trundler. You broke out in here, and you then pulled back into the 10-day line. That's where it was buyable, and then it slowly moved higher. Notice how it's been up every single day of the year in 2018, amazingly so. Nutanix, I don't know what's going on here. Not really. Got some support off the 50-day line. But see, that's the deep pullback you'd be looking for. Now it's just kind of floundering around the 20-day line. NVIDIA broke out to new highs. I don't know if you call this a cup with a high handle. To me, it just was a buy here on the pocket pivot. And then we put it on a focus list in here, and it gave you some shots to buy it under the 220 level a few times off the 10-day line, and now it's going higher as volume picks up. I think somebody raised their price target on it a huge amount. OLED, this is a breakout, but look for a pullback to the 10-day line. ON, another semiconductor that's extended. Palo Alto Networks, now this had a gap up move. That's not a buyable gap up though, because volume is not high enough, as opposed to this. And I don't know if this other one over here was a buyable gap up, but that didn't work. And now you have another one that's holding tight. This might be buyable, but I wouldn't call this a buyable gap up. You could use that low as a stop, but I don't know. How am I doing? It's 11:20. I'm cruising. Paychecks extended. Pod, I kind of like this one. Scotty, don't you use this product? By the way, aloha to you too. Are you in Hawaii? See if he answers. He's probably busy watching the waves come cruising in. Cool. What island? Kauai. Oh, you dog. Are you staying in Princeville? Or are you staying at the one of my favorites is the Hyatt Regency there? I can remember we stayed in Princeville at what used to be the Princeville Hotel, and we had the Royal Suite, which is a $5,000 a night suite. That's okay. I got to tell you something. That's the stupidest thing you could ever do. We paid $5,000 a night for this suite, and it's huge thing. We had 2 little kids at the time, and the problem is our kids would disappear in the room. We couldn't find them. They were probably 1 and 3 or something like that. So Marriott Beach, okay, club. That's a nice one. That's right next to the Hyatt Regency, is it not? But here's the funny story about this, okay? They give you your own butler with this room. And when we show up, this guy comes up, and my parents were with me. I think I'd brought the whole family with us. We all flew out in a G4, as I recall, and that was quite a party on the way out. But we get there and we check in our room, and this butler comes up, and he's going to be our butler while we're there. And it turns out it's a guy that I played Little League baseball with when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. This kid named Memo. And he was our butler. He had moved to Kauai, and he was working there as the butler. So it was really strange having him as our butler. So I really couldn't let him be our butler. So we kind of just, hung out and partied and stuff. So, I'd let him go get stuff, but that was very interesting. Qualcomm, I told you guys I like that. Redo, Rise Education came in. We talked about this, and I think we talked about this being viable in here. And we were saying it was a classic cup with handle at the time, and look at it, it's just perfect, and it broke out again. So you're either in it or you're not. Red Hat is holding in very tight. I really like this action. Look to be buying this one right here using the 20-day as a stop. Riot blockchain is like GBTC. You notice how you're at the 50-day line. They're similar. They look very similar, but this is holding at the 50-day line with volume drying up in the extreme. And I know Bitcoin's down right now, so it may be down tomorrow. We'll check this out. But I'm wondering.
Well, I've been looking into these these vehicles. And Riot blockchain is really should be suspect because it doesn't disclose its investments, and the things that it is invested in are questionable at best. It's involved in mining enterprises and things like that, and mining is really not the best way to play the blockchain space. So I would expect Riot. Well, I mean, I suppose it could have one more jump, but I wouldn't be looking to play the space through Riot. I'd rather be in something like GBTC. As far as those two blockchain ETFs, the issue with them is that they tend to be invested in companies like Intel, IBM, Cisco, Hitachi, Microsoft. So in other words, they're not going to be screamers. But on the other hand, they are exposed to companies they believe will benefit from the growing blockchain space. So if you want to have a very a low volatility way to play blockchain, you could do so through either BLCN or BLOK block. Either one of those, I think, would be viable. But something like Riot, it's all over the place, and I think it's a lot of hysteria going on in that.
Oh,
and
definitely.
You're much better off putting money into the GBTC or just buying Bitcoin on an exchange.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that info, Dr. K. Ring is extended. Roku's not really happening anymore. May need to set up in a whole new base, assuming it hasn't topped. Ross Stores trundling along the 10-day line. It seems a little bit extended to me on the weekly. If you took a look at the weekly chart, you can see this here. Solar Edge seems to be just basing, and I can't really say anything here until they come out with earnings, which I think is not till next month. Don't I have First Solar on here? Yeah, there's First Solar. Notice First Solar is pulling into the 20-day line. Really, the solars aren't doing anything, and I think they're waiting for the Trump administration to announce what their specific solar policy is going to be. So it's kind of hanging out here. My guess is you'll see these hang out until some announcement is made, and then they'll either rally or sell off, depending on how favorable it is or isn't, the news is. Okay, where were we? S-Fix. Now notice we talked about this on Friday, which, okay, we had a technical glitch on Friday, and you guys know what that was? It was not a technical glitch. It was actually the old, I forgot to turn on the record button. How's that? Brilliant, huh? Anyway, so you guys get another webinar, which I think this one's better, personally. SGH, Smart Global Holdings, trying to break out. It looks okay. No volume, though, so I don't know. Splunk is actually doing pretty well, and this was a breakout right here that has worked, and you had a nice yank down to the 20-day line. See, that's the kind of stuff you're looking for if the market comes off this week, and we have no idea. We won't know. We got still like a couple, 3 hours, well, about 3.5 hours before futures open up. Square had a nice move. It was not a viable gap up because volume was only 11% above average. But, it's trying to break out, I guess, but it's stalling in here, so I don't know. It looks good. But I think it was viable along the 50-day line. So switch, can't really flip the switch here and get going. So team, this one I thought was interesting because they came out with earnings. You'd already had a breakout. Okay, it was a decent breakout. You had some nice volume. And they bring it into the 20-day line. And it holds support and closes right above the 10-day line. So I'm almost thinking this is viable. So this one's on my my list because earnings have come out, and this may be one to look at. So take two, just setting up in a base. Notice how on the weekly chart here, if you guys can see, it's very tight in here. So I think you're going to see some reaction perhaps to earnings by EA. Twitter was a gap up move that didn't go anywhere. UCTT, Ultra Clean, this was pushing out with the other semiconductor equipment makers. Now I'm just watching to see how it sets up. But you're seeing these start to round out new bases, so they could easily go higher. United Health had a nice gap up move here on earnings, and then it's continued higher. So Venator, I'm watching this one. It's trying to materials. It's a recent IPO. You can see on the weekly chart. It's forming a big double bottomy cup thing, so hanging tight along the 10-day line. Possibly viable. Trades about 728,000. No, wait, what's it trade a day? Average volume is About 1,000,004, I think it is, so not bad. Weight Watchers just totally out of here. And this I sent a voodoo report out on this day, I believe, or this is this day. And I'm amazed that this thing just keeps going higher. I sold it way too soon, idiot. Win, uh, gapping up. Notice how all of the you'll see LVS also gapped up and they moved higher. So Yelp, we were looking at a couple of weeks ago when it had a pocket pivot through the 50-day line, but notice how that hasn't gone anywhere. So it needs some Yelp. YY extended, Z extended. No, it was no. Look at that, a gap up move, and now it's broken down. I don't really care for this one. Weibo should be on here. Whoops. I don't know why it's not. That's extended. Look for a pullback to the 10-day line if you got it. So that's basically my watch list, and you'll notice there are several names that look to be in position. I would be checking earnings reports on those and see when they come out. So, but other than that, I think we've got a good little list of things to look at for tomorrow, watching to see what happens once the market opens up and whether we get a pullback or not. So I don't have anything else to add. Any other last questions before we sign off?
Going to say that with stocks and new bonds, and that's been the way of things for quite a while. That's not a new observation. We've talked about that. And for those who really want to maximize their risk reward, that doesn't mean you have to be in a high octane name. You could look at a number of the names that are in Gil's watch list, for instance. There's a lot of overlap with the names I'm looking at in terms of risk reward. In other words, you're looking at the large cap name that tend to that tend to go back to their, they tend to drop down to their 10 or 20 day, and that could be a very good support point. We've talked about the Wyckoff undercut rally, voodoo setups, and things like that. And so, in other words, it's a great way to manage your risk when the market has a pullback. Like we might very well get one on Monday and Tuesday if the government shutdown isn't resolved. We could have a pullback of some magnitude of a few percent perhaps. And that could be a good pickup point for buying into some of these central bank favorites, because we know that central banks are now the majority shareholder in a number of these names. And since QE spigot is still fairly wide open and flowing, you can use that to your advantage. So again, your risk reward is really what's key, and the type of stock you want to play comes down to your risk management levels. But there's plenty of stocks out there in this environment, and my favorites tend to be the ones that are more technologically oriented. Some of the FANG names, obviously, we pointed out Nvidia and Netflix. So those are the higher octane movers, which are the ones I tend to favor. But you could also opt for, say, Google, which has a lower alpha and a lower beta. And over the long term, that all these names should continue to outperform.
All right, sounds good. Anyways, everybody, have a great Sunday, and for those of you watching football, have fun watching the games. And Scotty, don't get too sunburned out there. I'm sure it's just terrible weather out there. Anyways, go Vikes, says Joe. Anyways, great seminar, guys. Somebody says. Anyways, you guys, thanks for showing up. We'll catch you next time. Take care.
So long, everyone.